And good evening. You just saw a little glimpse there of who my guest is tonight. It's Doug Kaye from the West Coast of America. Doug, welcome to my show.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Paul.
That's lovely, Doug. Thank you. I've been trying to get you on my show for such a long time. I'm delighted to be able to join me. But just before we start, I just want to say apologies to everyone that the Life and Uncut show has been sort of absent for about 6 to 8 weeks. It's been a little bit of a difficult period of time for me, but it's all done and past, and I'm moving on to new pastures and a new chapter in my life, concentrating more on the photography, the show, and workshops as well. So more to come on that later. But as I said, Doug, thanks for joining me. And you've just come back from Cuba, and you're got a little bit of a break, holidays coming up, and then you're off again in January.
That's right. Yeah, we just did a Havana workshop, 6-day workshop. We've got another one in January, and also 6 days Havana. And then in March, I go back again for a 10-day workshop that includes Havana and 2 other towns, Vinales and Trinidad. And we still have room open. If anybody wants to join us, just come and get more information at dougkaye.com.
Exactly right. Well, what I'm going to do is after the show, I'll put a little blog up and we'll put all these addresses up for you to hopefully fill those places for you. I really hope you can. I just wish that I could be able to join you, but it's a difficult period of time for me for the start of the year. But let's start off as I always start off with my guest. The camera, which was just a young kid.
The first camera I encountered was my father's camera. It was a twin lens reflex. I don't know the brand, shooting 2.25 negatives. And Dad had a dark room in the house, but there was also a public dark room in the city of San Francisco where I grew up.
Okay.
And I used to love going there with him and developing the film and doing the prints. And it was just, that was I was a pretty young kid. I mean, I was probably, 8, 9 years old at that point.
And then basically, did photography follow you through? Because, I remember when you first started joining the guys on TWIP and discussing, there's a bit of a technical background to your life and your career. Was photography a mainstay of your life right the way through?
Well, other than about a 20-year break, I went to college, like a lot of people in the 60s. I started in a program called engineering physics, but I graduated with a degree in drama, which was, which is one of my emphases was lighting design. So I had a lot of background in theatrical lighting design. When I got out, and I was a director, so I got out of college, of course, you say to the world, hello, I'm a director, and the world says nothing at all, just the sound of crickets.
Exactly right.
Got a job as a stagehand, but that got me into the motion picture business. And in the motion picture business, I really wanted to learn all the disciplines, particularly cinematography. But being in the union, it's very segregated, and I wasn't allowed to get anywhere near the camera. So I ended up going back to college, went to graduate school and studied cinematography in graduate school. Worked in the film business for a few years, but then I got hijacked by the software business. And for, like I say, nearly 20 years, I pretty much didn't own a camera.
Right.
And I even failed to document my son's early years. My wife took pictures, but she had a little camera, but I didn't. I had a camera. But in 20 years, I probably shot 20 rolls of film. That was about it.
Yeah. I do remember when you first appeared on the TWIP show talking to Frederick and the guys, and there was this constant comment about you being involved in software program and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't realize that initially you'd majored in drama.
Yeah. Lighting design was, I still use what I've learned there. I mean, lighting design for the stage was fascinating. And then, marrying that with cinematography, I studied with one of the great Czechoslovakian cinematographers in New York, and that was a great time. And to this day, I'm still using some of those tips that I learned then.
Amazing. And so how did the involvement in your arrangement to work in TWIP come about?
Well, I had gone to Kenya on a safari with my wife, photo safari. And this is at the point I didn't own a digital camera. And I said,
Okay.
I'm going to Kenya for 3 weeks. I guess I'd better get a camera. And I called a friend. He told me what camera to buy, and I went there and just got hooked. I was retired at the time already, and from the software and .com world. So, that got me back into photography. I said, I guess I'm a photographer. Anyway, I knew Frederick, and Alex Lindsay. And so I was chatting with him. I said, hey, I just got back from Kenya. You want to do a show about, photography in Kenya? And they said, sure. So I go on, but what they didn't tell me was that the other guest was Andy Biggs. Well, Andy, goes to Africa, 5 times a year. He's an extremely good photographer. So I was a little out of my league on that very first episode of TWIP, which was many years ago.
So he really dropped you straight in the deep end there with that one. Thank you, Fred.
Yeah, that's what I get for volunteering, right?
So you get for volunteering, and you suggested the show as well.
That's right. So I became a pretty frequent guest on TWIP. And then, let's see, nearly 3 years ago, two and 3/4 years ago, Frederick and I, we were always talking on the show, it's not about the gear. It's not about the gear. So I said, yes, it is. So we started the first program on TWIP called All About the Gear, the first show that wasn't This Week in Photo. And I did that for 2.5 years.
They're quite honest with you. They're all about the gear when it first came. Because I'm watching whilst I'm supposed to be working in the office. I had TWIP in the top left hand corner of my screen, just on a very low volume, listening to the guys talk, and all about the gear was mentioned. And I thought, hey, this could be interesting, because I just love knowing about all the new stuff coming through. It was Frederick's fault that I bought into the Fuji system, because I just had to laugh about his experience with the X100, and he was waiting for it, and you managed to switch him to get the Olympus. And then I started watching Dave Hobby and Zach Arias talking about the X100s. And I got the XE1 because I wanted the interchangeable lens. But I always remember watching the little screen there with you talking about all about these gears and all these cameras coming in that you were getting. And yet, I think if I remember correctly, were you still using, we call it Nikon, were you still using Nikon at the start of All About the Gear? Or had you switched by then?
Yeah, when I started that show, which was 2.5 years ago, 2 3/4 years ago, I was primarily a Nikon shooter. I had a few other cameras, but it was primarily, I had a D3S and I had a D700, and those were my mainstay cameras. So I made the transition to mirrorless along with, our audience.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I've never looked back. I now own no Nikon bodies. I own no DSLRs at all. I do have one Nikon macro lens that I love and I use with my Sony bodies, but that's the only that and some old Nikon strobes. That's the only thing I think I have around here.
Yeah, I think when the mirrorless scenario thing came about, it struck me that Sony were the guys that really sort of pushed the boundaries a lot quicker. Probably, this is my interpretation, probably because of their integration with software work. But I just wanted to ask you, you obviously had an opportunity to see so many of these cameras coming out. Why was it that you chose Sony? Was it because it was the first one that caught your attention, or was it the fact that you decided that they were the guys, so to speak?
It's a good question. My first mirrorless camera was an NEX6.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you why I bought that camera, but I can tell you what happened next. Along the way, we reviewed a new camera every 2 weeks, which was a lot of work. The problem with that was that I never got to use my own gear. I was always using gear that was loaned to us for the purpose of doing reviews. But along the way, I reviewed a Leica M240. And I said specifically, I remember I said, there's no way I'm ever going to spend $7,000 on a camera, let alone $3,000 to $10,000 for a lens. But in the process, I fell in love with that look, particularly the lenses. The camera is relatively unimpressive, but the lenses are gorgeous. So when Sony came out with the first A7, if you remember, there were no lenses. They had 2 lenses. That was it.
Yeah.
But they also, if you bought one, they gave you a free adapter. You could get an adapter to either Nikon or Canon, but for a few dollars, you could buy one to Leica M mount. So I went out and started buying old, cheap Leica lenses. I mean, my first one was a $300 lens, 135 millimeter f4. And the $20 adapter. And so I was using Leica lenses, manual focus on the Sony A7 line. And that's really the thing that got me into that line of cameras. Sony's probably got, certainly they're the only ones in full frame. They're the only full frame mirrorless cameras, except for Leica. And their technology is very good. The problem with Sony is really the usability of their cameras. If you're used to, Fuji's are infinitely nicer to use than the Sony cameras. And I think it's fair to say that the Fuji look is probably a better look for most people, especially the JPEG. So anyway, long story, but that's how I got into Sony, was primarily as an excuse to be able to shoot with Leica lenses.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the NEX6, because I bought the NEX3, mainly just to couple up with my Nikon camera to keep it nice and simple for a walkabout. But of course, the one thing about the 3 against the 6 was it didn't have a viewfinder, and I just couldn't work that route. I needed a viewfinder, especially as it turned out. We were just talking about it before. The first time I used the NEX3 was in Dubai. I just couldn't see the back of the screen. I just didn't know what I was taking. So unfortunately, that camera sort of came and went very quickly. And I went back to my Nikons until effectively found the Fuji system. And like you, I've just got rid of all my Nikon gear apart from a couple of film cameras. I'm fully Fuji through now. And it is the retro look that caught my attention, but also added to the fact that the lens has got the aperture dial. You've got the shutter dial on the top of the plate, and you're not actually going through a menu to operate the camera, which I think is where the Sony, which you alluded to, was one of the main problems, which a lot of people commented.
The cameras that have the best controls, from my mind, are the Fuji and the Leica Q. In the Micro Four Thirds world, you've got, obviously, Olympus is marvelous. You got Panasonic, which is great. But Sony is the only player in full frame mirrorless right now. So that's where I am. I like that full frame, that and the Leica.
What is your opinion, because I want to look at your work, and then from that we're going to discuss with your cameras and lenses you're using there. What, in your opinion, is the problem with Nikon and Canon not getting involved with this mirrorless movement? I know there's ramifications that they're going to in the future, and I know we've had the Nikon 1 and the Canon EM system, but why don't you think they got fully involved with this move sooner?
It's a pretty classic story. If anybody who's been in business school knows the name Clay Christensen, or Clayton Christensen, at Harvard Business School, and he wrote a book a number of years ago called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he took a number of case studies, the first one being the disk drive business, where manufacturers were making just a boatloads of money making 5 1/4 inch disk drives. And when the technology came out to make 3.5 inch disk drives, they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to cannibalize their own lines of business. What happened was that the younger upstart companies came in, made 3.5 inch drives, and put the 5 1/4 guys, for the most part, or in many cases, out of business. Same thing. So I think, I don't know firsthand, but I think the problem is that Nikon and Canon suffer from the innovator's dilemma, which is they don't want to run a camera division that's going to eat away at the one thing that they have. And of course, for Nikon, it's fading pretty quickly financially. But, if somebody came out, if one of those companies came out with a good mirrorless camera that worked with the existing glass, I think they would sell a lot of cameras. But they would also stop selling some of the big cameras. But it's a very, very difficult thing for a company to do, because the only way they can do it really is to start a separate subsidiary, because it's going to compete with them.
Exactly. And I think this is probably where the Nikon 1 system fell foul, because it was very innovative, and I think some of the bits and bobs out of the Nikon 1 system was seeping into the APS and probably some full frame scenarios, and I think the same applies with Canon. But I've always had this feeling that I agree with you 100% that they were worried about creating a monster within a monster and upsetting their professional market at the end of it, where they've got the mainstay of their business. And I get the impression that Nikon and Canon, their whole drive is to maintain, especially the sports photographers, in that keep them with the Nikon, and they don't want anything to upset that apple cart, as I would say.
Right, and that's one area. I mean, you still have the Nikon. You know, the D500 is a marvelous sports camera. It's the only one that comes close in mirrorless is probably the Sony A6500 and 6300. I mean, that's the autofocus is still one thing that the DSLRs have, but that's the last advantage, and it's pretty much about to go away right now.
Yeah. Of course, the Fuji's bringing out the X-T2 and the X Pro 2. They're starting to sort of eat into it, as far as I can work out. I've seen some sports photographers and nature photographers making comments about how they're performing it in the field, but I haven't read a lot about what the comments are. Have you experienced the X-T2 yet? I know.
I do. I now do a new review show on CameraLabs.com with Gordon Lang, a fellow countryman of yours, and Gordon has done the X-T2. I have not used one myself.
Right. I've used the X Pro 2, and it's pretty much the same, apart from the fact one's a rangefinder style and one's a DSLR style. And I was very impressed with the X Pro 2 as regards to focus ability, its tracking ability. But you know, it's I think it's horses for courses when you look at it, be quite honest with you. And you know, the Fujis have still got quite a bit of catch up to do, although I personally think they're getting there. Let's do a screen share, Doug. Let's go and have a look at your work, and as I do before, as I was saying before, I'll just do a flick through as we go, and you make some comments as you're going along with regards. Thanks very much indeed for sending through these images to me to start off with. I'm intrigued as the way this set of images have been put together. They're totally random, as you mentioned, but in some of them you've done some good work in here. This one obviously is a classic example of taking out all the other colors apart from green and red, and a pretty dynamic image here. Is this a local area to you?
Yeah, this is a restaurant. It's no longer there, so it's sort of a classic image in our neighborhood. But yeah, I left some green and red. And there's also the interior light. If you look at it closely, it's sort of an amber colored light on the interior.
That's right, yeah.
And this is not the kind of work I do any longer. This is an old image, but it's one that's been popular, and I've sold a number of prints of this, especially since the restaurant's gone, and the fact that it says where grease meets organic, that made it popular. But,
exactly right. And this when digital first came about. When digital first came about, sorry to interrupt you there. This was a really popular thing to do, you know, where people realized that they could basically desaturate certain colors and make other colors sort of stand out.
Yeah, this is part of a series. I have a whole series called Closed. You see the sign on the door says closed, but they're obviously open. But I've got a whole series where I've shot retail establishments through the windows when there was, they were closed. This is also an older image. It's on the back of my business card, actually. This is Santa Fe, New Mexico, shot at dawn. There's a little bit of sunlight and also a handheld flashlight to illuminate this also. Just a regular old LED flashlight.
That's a nice one. A little bit of enhancement with the colors in editing, I suppose.
Not much.
Not much, really.
Pretty colorful image to begin with.
And the camera you used on that one, can you remember?
I'm going to guess, given the date of this, is probably a D700, something like that.
Right, okay. Because you used the D800 and the 800E for quite a bit, yeah?
I had an 800E that I sold pretty quickly. I wasn't happy with that camera. I never did buy the 810, but that's a much better camera. This, I remember.
Did the 800, yeah, sorry, go back to it. You were going to make a comment.
I remember this. This was shot with a D3S and a 70-200.
Okay.
And I used to say that one of the most beautiful women I've ever photographed is actually a guy. But I live in San Francisco, so we get used to this.
Yeah, exactly right.
Typical shot from Cuba, and
Cuba,
the colors, the shadows attracted me to this. The shame of this is I know exactly where this is, and every time I go back, I go to this corner, and they've now painted that wall a very faded yellow instead of this bright yellow, and it's really a shame.
That's a shame, isn't it?
It's a nice stage. Oh, this is a brand new image. This is infrared. I converted a Sony A7S. I had an A7S I couldn't sell. I sold it on Amazon. Somebody returned it. I sold it again. Somebody returned it. So I said, forget it. I'm going to stop selling it. And I sent it to LifePixel for conversion. I did the conversion to a 720, whatever it is, nanometer, 720 nanometer.
Yeah, it's 720 nanometer. Yeah, I've got that myself.
Pretty much pure infrared. There's very little visible.
Yeah.
Particularly because I wanted to shoot people. Most people who do infrared they want white trees and landscape stuff. But for me,
exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's what it does to skin tones. It makes these almost China doll soft skin tones. It takes out a lot of imperfections. So this is an infrared shot. Actually, it's just about a week ago. It's a very new image.
Right, lovely. It's something which I did with my XE1 because I bought the X100S, and then I had an opportunity to get the X Pro one, and I thought I can't. The value of the XE1 was ridiculous, so I punched up some money and put a 720 NM filter in there as well. And I agree with you. It's a great system to have for the usual infrared with the white trees and the dark blue skies, and it's great for architectural work as well. But there is something about when you do some street photography and you get a portrait like this, you got that I would describe as a lovely creamy look to her complexion there.
Yeah, which, I'm not so when I started in digital photography, I was all about weird stuff. I did a lot of HDR. I did a lot of, over the top color stuff. And over the years, I've gotten farther and farther from that to the point where I do almost no post-production. I do almost no cropping. I've gone the other direction entirely. And anyway, although this is geeky because it's infrared, it's pretty much straight out of the camera.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's another infrared shot, I'm assuming.
Photographed on the same day. This is a young woman on a bus. It looks very low contrast, but when
it does. Yeah,
pretty good. Yeah. Boy, I gave you a whole bunch of infrared. The guy on the saxophone, that's infrared also. The key here, of course, is that he's in the sunlight and the background has nothing. She is not infrared.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also what I would do also find out.
I've been, thanks to a friend of mine who got me involved with this, I've been shooting a lot of dance recently, and I love it. It's very similar to shooting nature in that the best photographs come when you learn to anticipate what's going to happen. And that's not so matter of memorizing the dance, but just getting used to dancers, shooting around dancers. Of course, in the theater days, I spent a lot of time with dancers, but this has been a lot of fun for me to photograph dance.
Just had a freeze up with Don. Hopefully he's going to catch up.
He's back. You're back.
Okay, great. We froze up for a second. I was wondering, in actual fact, was asking Doug was, is this a Cuba shot here?
That's actually a friend of mine, Helen. She's a tobacco farmer in the town of Vinales. And this is completely natural light, but you'll notice how very cinema look. It has a cinema look to it, and that's because it's the classical key light, fill light, backlight, but it's all coming from the doors and the windows that are in her little tobacco farm.
That's lovely. I've seen this image before. It just makes me laugh every time I see it.
That's the town of Cienfuegos in Cuba. Those phone booths are great. In fact, the workshop that we just had, one of the students on the workshop decided they were going to duplicate that image. They found a phone booth and got someone to stand in the same posture. Very funny.
You didn't put a copyright on it.
Again, so more dance.
A couple of dance shots here as well.
More dance.
I love the light on those hands.
Yeah. And this is just the horrible stage lighting. The same stuff I used to design. I look back, I say, boy, I must have been torturing photographers for a living,
Yeah.
But you can get some nice shots with it anyway.
Amazing.
More dance.
Some street photography coming up now.
Yeah, here's some. This is middle of Times
Square. Doug, you've got that ability to go up to someone and say, "Hey, how's things going? Do you mind if I take your photograph?" It's a pretty sort of open and free type of thing for you to do.
This one's a good example of that. This is Washington Square Park in New York City. And I was on the other, there's a fountain to camera left here. And I was on the other side of the fountain, and I just saw her, and she got her hair wet and she shook her hair, and I just loved it. I came over, we started chatting, and I told her, I showed her a picture on the back of the camera that I'd taken from far away. And I asked her if she'd be willing to do that for me. And she got her hair wet again and shook her hair, and I just loved it. She was just the nicest person. So this was great.
Lovely crease in her nose there where she's cringing up. It's great. Yeah. Very, very natural pose there. It's really nice.
This is just sort of an iconic image of mine. This is the front of my business card. It works well for the front of a business card because there's all that white space for typing.
Exactly, all that space to put your blurb up. Great one.
But this is about 12 miles from my home, the Golden Gate Bridge, so it's easy.
On the blue background. The land over there will time. Coming, just have a little bit of breakdown in your voice. You still there, Doug?
Yeah, I am. I lost some of you, but I'm here.
Bit of a difficult thing today. You're back.
I did a series on motion. If you go back to the one before, go back one shot. We skipped one there. Yeah, this is a revolving door. I wanted to do motion.
That's right. Yeah.
And then when you start to do motion, you say, so what's the not obvious thing to do? Look at the next one. Here I wanted to use motion, not to photograph the things that were moving, but as a way of using motion to highlight the things that weren't moving. And that was the purpose. So this was a very intentional shot. Found a guy standing and then waited for the crowd to come by. Probably shot it at about a 30th of a second.
But it's interesting, when you actually look at something like this, and you've taken a photograph of someone walking, you look how many feet in actual fact are planted and they haven't moved. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll say 5 with the one on the bottom left-hand corner that are planted, and it gives you that sort of that strange feel to it. They're walking, but isn't it amazing?
Yeah, same point.
Your foot is still
revolving door. Also,
exactly right. With her leg, with her foot planted there.
Yeah, there's always a point at which when the foot's in contact with the ground, it's obviously not moving.
Exactly. Yeah. And here again, another example, a very dynamic coat, which you've caught in motion blur, but walking across your frame.
Yeah.
What sort of shutter speed were you using there?
Again, this might be more like a 15th of a second. I'm guessing.
15th of a second. Yeah.
Yeah. It might be a little slower, might be an 1/8 of a second, but you get a pattern like this, and that the pattern can actually survive the blur. It's so bold. So
exactly. Yeah.
So she's actually slightly less blurred than the other people. Again, the same. Yeah. This is the same project, which is, looking at motion in a very different way than one normally approaches the topic of motion.
Yeah. Little girl in the doorway.
This is a recent photograph. This is in Paris. I was there with Valerie Jardin.
Yeah, Valerie Jardin.
A month and a half ago.
Yeah.
And took this in one of the churches there. This is an interesting story about this because I've put that image into competition a few times. And at one time it did very well. And another time the judges just hated it because they can't stand that negative dark space on the right side. But
yeah, exactly.
That space, if you look at it on a print, there's a little bit of detail in there, and there's that little bit of line under the door. And to me, compositionally, it's an important part of the picture, but sometimes the competing judges don't always see it your way.
No, they don't. And it's very frustrating when they don't.
This is an example of something I've been working with a lot recently. This looks artificial, it looks pumped up, but again, it's pretty much straight out of the camera. Mm-hmm. What you're seeing here is a combination of direct sunlight and light that's bouncing off a window. And so if you look carefully, you'll see that there are shadows going in multiple directions.
Yeah.
And that gives it this sort of a wild look. But when I go out now to do street photography, particularly in San Francisco, because it's local, I am looking for sunlight and reflected light that's coming from another direction, and trying to find ways to use those two light sources combined to get an interesting image. And this is the most recent example of that. That's a Paris cafe.
Yeah. This is the photograph which I was talking about, where in actual fact they're not blurred. They're fairly, they're obviously moving, but you've held them in a static situation. But I love the angles here, which are being created by the freight carrier and the lead of the dog there, and you can take it to the paper bag on the left hand side, and then of course the legs. They're all, this is all about angles, even the Y of view.
Yeah, and this is a composite. This is a composite of about 12 images.
Oh, right. Okay, that's what. Oh, right. Okay.
Another series I'm doing. So this is handheld, probably with a Leica Q, and I'm just standing there. Notice the one woman looking towards me she's apologizing for jumping into my frame, but none of those people were there at the same time.
Now it's interesting you mentioned that, because when I first saw it, I described it as I saw it, but then now you mentioned it is a composite photograph. I can see the difference there with the man with the dog and the girl walking in front is not quite the same sort of depth of field, if you get my drift.
Yeah, he would, in real life, he would crash right into her. Right?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So again, I think this was about 12 images, all taken, in the same position, and Photoshop takes care of aligning for me, but then I'm going in and hand masking to eliminate, to blend these images together. But it's something I've been doing for a couple of years when I go out on the street, and I think there's probably one more of those coming. But this is a composite image. I call them street composites.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you had this commented on by a judge by any chance?
Yeah, I did actually, and I put it into a category we call creative images.
Okay.
Composite. Yeah. And the judge pretty much disqualified it. He says, I don't see why it's creative. He said, it's not like it's a composite image or something. They
just knocked me out. They just knocked me out completely. I will tell you a story about a judge that I had, not on one of my images, but on someone else's later. Is this a composite?
No, that's just last week in Cuba. In fact, I spent a week with my workshop students, but I did almost no still photography because I shot the whole week with the iPhone 7 Plus shooting 4K video.
Oh, okay.
It is spectacular. I'm editing now. I'm going to put together probably a 15-minute film, all shot with the Osmo Mobile gimbal thing.
Yes,
and the iPhone 7 Plus in 4K video, and wow, is it spectacular. It really is great.
I've just got the iPhone 7, but I've heard
in fact, I'm going to give you a link for this page. It's a link to a video that's 3 minutes, a 3-minute take of my walking down a street in Havana. And I think you're going to be really impressed, not so much with me, but with what the iPhone 7 Plus can do at sunset, in the dark almost. It's amazing.
Right, okay. Yeah, please send that link on up.
Here's an older shot from Cuba. Again, just looking for interesting light, and sometimes all you need is the dome light of a car.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And then there's a little bit of a delay in me talking to you. These guys coming off on the escalator. Now this is a composite.
That's a composite, yeah. That was taken in San Francisco.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that with us, Doug. I think you dropped off a couple of times while we were talking. You froze up, but we got the general gist of it, of your work there. Fascinating. The story I was going to tell you, I'll keep it brief. There was a photograph which was presented. It was in color, and it was of, I could see it straight away, and everyone in the audience could see it straight away. It was a photograph of 4 paraplegic Olympians. The judge just went and said, well, okay, we've got a guy on the left there who's got one leg. And it so happened that his right leg was missing, and it was counterbalanced on the other side with the other person. And he said, I can't really quite work this photograph out. It's a shame that we got the distraction in the background of the color banners, which is probably the only thing that I agreed with. But he just went on and on about it, and he couldn't understand why one of the Olympians was sitting on the ground. She didn't have any legs. And he said, I'll give it 7. And I said, oh, okay. And we were just, so then, and then he went, no, wait. He said, I just realized what's happened. He said, this is a photograph taken at the Paralympics. I've just realized they're handicapped. And I could not believe how he'd just gone through the whole description of the image, and the penny hadn't dropped. And to me, that's when, I must be honest with you, that's when judging at photographic competitions just sort of, shall we say, fell off the cliff. And I couldn't take it anymore.
You know, as a street photographer, you know, I've gotten away from landscape. I've gotten away from almost everything except street photography, and my work is less and less appropriate for competition. So
exactly right.
That's fine. That's fine. But I've had to learn my lesson that, you know, everybody who wants, you know, everything perfect at the edge of the frame and they want all the buildings straight. My photography is less and less like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing we have over in this country is basically the competitions are open, so they're not down a particular group. They don't group them: nature, sport, street. They're just up. They come on the mount like we got behind here, or basically digitally on the screen. So it's a total open scenario. So you could, in actual fact, have a judge who is a floral still life photographer who's commenting on street life photography or landscape photography or sport, and that's where it all starts to unravel for me, because those that judge likes, they're going to get the higher mark than those that she doesn't like, for obvious reasons in terms of genre approval. How did the workshop go in Paris with Valerie? I was intrigued to see you sitting by the wayside there in a cafe, and I think you were videoing it at the same time. It looked to me as though you were having a great time.
Oh, it's marvelous. I mean, she runs great workshops, especially in Paris, because, of course, that's home for her. And we were lucky. We had good weather. We had good location. We had great food. Food's very important. And a really nice group of people.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, Valerie, more than anybody I know, except maybe Martin Bailey, she has repeat guests. She has people who come back workshop after workshop after workshop. I had a woman in Cuba with me last week who's been with Valerie in France, I think 3 times.
Really? Yeah, she's well. I learned so much from her when she was my master in the Arcanum, and she chose me. I think basically because I'd made some comment to her work on Facebook and Google Plus, and I wasn't really into street photography that much, but she certainly changed my way there on regards to that. Great insight into the study of that particular genre. Doug, I wanted to ask you, it's probably a difficult question for you to answer, because you've seen so many cameras. This is a precede to my next question, but you mentioned about the Leica. Would you honestly say that if you hadn't have got yourself so entrenched in the Sony equipment before, that could have been your system? Or was there another system which you would have potentially preferred to have worked with?
You mean the Leica gear?
Whether it was the Leica or whether it was another system when you were doing all about the gear.
Yeah, the problem with Leica is it's so damn expensive, you know.
Exactly.
And you know, it has beautiful optical qualities, but at an extreme price. You know, I said that I would never spend $7,000 for a camera. What I ended up doing, of course, was buying a used one for about $4,000. But I mean, this is my primary camera now. It's a Leica Q, and it's expensive, but the advantage is it's similar to your Fuji, very similar, but except it's full frame, and it's non-interchangeable. I can't spend any more money on this because it has a non-interchangeable 28mm lens. But this is a camera that operationally I like more than any camera I've ever used. It fits like a glove. I've had it for a little over a year, and it has become my absolute go-to camera for shooting on the street.
That's interesting.
I do have I have a film Leica M6. I have a Leica 240 digital, and I have quite a few Leica lenses, but I use a 90mm on my Sony, 90mm Leica on my Sony, but this Leica Q is my #1 camera.
That's interesting. Interesting. The next question we lose on to, which is probably even more of a difficult question to ask. Who would you class as your most favorite photographer?
My most favorite, let's see. Probably a Cuban friend of mine, Raul Cañabano.
Oh, right. Interesting.
Raul is a marvelous photographer. He does street photography, but also documentary photography. The difference being that he will go to a farming village for, every week for a year and get to know the people and really document their lives. I think in the late 90s, he was awarded best photographer in all of Cuba. But Raul Cañabano does just brilliant black and white work, beautifully layered.
Yes.
But shooting with it. Do you know him? Do you know Raul's work?
I don't know the guy. So no, it's a totally new name on me.
Right, but he also just shooting with him is a joy because the way he moves and dances and he's just great. But his work is marvelous. Probably some of my favorite stuff right now.
Your comment there about layered work, I think, is very much a comment in photography which is not used enough. We all talk about depth, we all talk about composition, the rule of thirds. But when you actually study a photographer that knows how to use the layers in photography, Soul Lighter immediately comes to mind for my liking, where you've got the immediate impact in the front, and then there's something else happening behind that, and then yet again something else behind that part of the scene. That to me that's when you can see a quality, especially in street photography, a quality of photography work.
What it's like, photography is a marvelous thing because it's something that you can learn. It's something that you can improve at, but you have to work at it. If you just go out and take pictures, that's fine, but you won't become a better photographer. And I think about learning to fly an airplane. You go out and you fly a simple airplane. You conquer that, and then you fly an increasingly more complicated airplane, one with retractable landing gear, one with higher power engines, one with 2 engines, one with no engines. But you fly, you take on additional challenges. In photography, you go out and you'll find a subject, and your first impulse is to push the button, take a picture. And then you learn, well, maybe I should try a different angle. And then people teach you, well, maybe you should be careful about your backgrounds, be careful about your edges of the frame, all these things. Yeah. But eventually, as you integrate all these techniques into your photography, you look for more and more. And you get someone like Raul who creates images that have literally 3 layers. It's almost like they're a composite. You'll have something going on in the foreground. You'll have something else going on in the middle ground, something else still going on in the background, all composed the right way, but all done candidly, all done on the spot. Yeah. So he can see these multiple layers, position himself so that all 3 of them juxtapose just the way he wants them. These are very rich and exciting images to me. And I would love to be able to shoot as well as he does. I think I'll probably never get there, but he's my inspiration.
Does he have a book at all that
Raul has, surprisingly, he has a really nice small book. It's on Amazon. It's only about $15 here in the US. I'll send you a link to it. Remind me, because it's just a little book of some of his best images, and the fact that you can get it for only $15, it's very, very nice.
Sounds a little bit of a steal at $15, crikey.
Yeah.
That's a good one. My bookcase, courtesy of Ted Forbes, with all his suggestions of books, is creaking under the strain, and will be creaking further after Christmas, after I have just sent my letter off to Father Christmas and all that stuff we do. You mentioned there Raul will be your inspiration. So I'm going to switch the question a little bit, because I normally say, who is your inspiration? Who has been the most influential in your photography?
Yeah.
Or in actual fact, when I think about it, sorry to interrupt you, perhaps that's unfair to me to consistently stay with photography. Who's been the most influential to you in your life?
Oh, wow. That, I don't know if I can answer that one. Let's stick with photography. Okay. Photography's been my life for the last decade. So my inspiration probably comes from there. I mean, you go back to the classic street guys, Henri Cartier-Bresson, of course, Gary Winogrand, Elliot Erwitt for his humor. By the way, if people don't have it, one book I do recommend, but it's not inexpensive, is the Magnum Contact Sheets book. I love fantastic. I love this book. Do you have it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I love this book. Yeah, because you can see not just the shots that are famous, but you can see the shots that were made before and after that were rejected. That's it right there. And this is
unbelievable. You're so right, Doug, because you can basically go through. I'll just hold it up. I haven't got a chance to show it. Look, I haven't got an overhead camera like your good selves, but you can see these contact sheets of the photographers and what they've done, and which one they've preferred and which one they're going to work with. It is a great Bible to work from, isn't it?
It is. It's so educational, and it makes you realize that not every shot's a winner, right?
Very true. Very true.
But a photographer that has inspired my style more than any other is a fellow who just recently died named Fan Ho, Fanho.
Yes, I know the name.
Yeah, he was originally from China, Hong Kong. Ended up living here in California. Never got to meet him, but he has images. His older images are extremely dramatic. I mean, when I do a photograph, I'm really looking just for impact. More than anything else is impact. More than story, more than color, more than anything else, I want an impactful picture. And Fan Ho's pictures were always that way for me. The early ones were primarily because of the light, and he's taught me to go out, and the one thing I look for, I don't look for subject matter. I don't look for anything other than light. And people who shoot with me know that I'll go out on the street and I'll say, oh, look, there's some interesting light a block away, and then go find that light and then decide what the photograph's going to be. Anyway, his more recent stuff was also very complex composites. A famous image compositing the canals of Venice with the old streets of Hong Kong, for example. So Fan Ho was, because of the light, was a big inspiration to me.
Yeah. I know the name. It's a person that I haven't studied that much, to be honest with you. But as I say, I do know the name.
And now, of course, we have Vivian Maier.
Well,
Vivian Maier's work is spectacular. I think she's going to end up being known as one of the very best of the 20th century.
I agree with you to a degree on the sense of the photographs that I've seen. The majority of photographs I've seen. The disappointment I have, Doug, is the fact that the way her photography is being used potentially for the benefit of those that own the photographs now. And I think some of the photographs, and I think other people have commented on this as well, and I do have to err on that side. I think some of the photographs that have been published, she would not have wanted them to have been published. I don't think there are certain aspects where they're really, really good. A series of photographs where she took, some would say pretty boring, of her photographing herself reflecting in the window. But then I think there's been an overcook of that. I think there's been too much of that style. But I do agree with you, purely and simply because of the story and the way that those photographs were found. Is an intriguing line, and books will follow. But I do think sometimes there's some images which have been shown are not the right images to have been shown, if you get my drift.
Which of course is way beyond her control, and as we know,
exactly right.
We believe that she didn't want any of her images to be seen, otherwise she wouldn't let them out. But the fact is that if you ignore the ones that are inferior, the good work is phenomenal in the way that it captures life. Yeah,
very true.
And in street photography, to me, it's all about being on the street, being part of what's going on, being an observer as well as to some extent a participant. And she had a magical way of doing it. And in fact, to celebrate her, I went out and bought this beautiful 1966 Rolly 28F, which is, I believe, the last camera that she used. And I have one in mint condition, which I use on the streets of San Francisco on occasion to attract a lot of attention, needless to say.
Yeah, and also, funny enough, I was walking through the streets of Amsterdam last month, and a young lady walked past with that very same camera, and she said, I I said, intriguing, just had a chat with her about it. And she said, I'm literally just learning how to use it. She said, normally I'm walking around with a digital camera. So these twin lens reflex cameras are really coming back into vogue now. I know Martin Bailey's got one, and a couple of other fellas that I can't remember now that have gone out and bought these cameras, and they're really sort of getting some neat work done by the cameras, you know, even though they are effectively 50, 60 years old.
Yeah. I mean, it is great to go out and shoot a few rolls of film. This camera happens to have a light meter in it, but I don't use it. I don't carry a light meter. I don't use this light meter. I just eyeball the exposures using the Sunny 16 rule. And luckily, black and white negative or even color negative is fairly forgiving, particularly it's the opposite of digital. If you overexpose, it's not too bad. Underexpose is more of a sin with negative film. And you know, I'll go out and shoot, you know, 24 or 36 exposures for a day. And I love coming back and having nothing to do because I have to send them to the lab for processing.
I was just going to ask you, how do you go about that?
Yeah. I don't have anything to upload to my computer. I don't have any backups to worry about. You know, I have no sensors to clean. I just package up the film. Maybe, in fact, I have a roll somewhere sitting around here in the office I haven't sent in. It's been here for a week. I'm not in a hurry. You know, it's a totally different
Isn't it interesting
lifestyle.
how you actually end up working that way? Because I remember speaking to Rincy Ruiz a number of shows back. Crikey, it was one of the very early shows. So I said, how many basic images do you take when you go out for a street walk, Rincy? And he went, oh, probably around about, well, not more than 90. Not more than 90. I said, oh, okay. And when you get back in, you upload them to your computer and start straight away. He said, no. I put them into the computer and I forget about them for 4 days. Yeah. He said, I let them marinate, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah. See, I got back from Cuba with 4.5 hours of 4K video. And, you know, the first thing I did is I wanted to get them onto the computer so I could see what they look like on a real 5K monitor, my iMac, because all I had seen up to that point, I didn't take a laptop to Cuba or an iPad for that matter. So I only had the little, you know, the little iPhone 7 Plus screen to look at them. I said, well, they sure look good on the phone. I wonder how they're going to look on a big screen. And they were not disappointing. They look really good.
That's great. Can I just ask you one final question? How often do you go out shooting locally?
I try to go out every week. I have a friend, actually 2 friends that I shoot with, sort of alternating. I try to go out every Friday to San Francisco. The most important thing is where I'm going to eat lunch, and I work backwards from that. I'm not successful. Given my travel schedule, I'm probably shooting on the streets 2 to 3 times a month is all I actually can pull off. Yeah.
But the reason for me asking was, as you alluded to it earlier on, it's like practice. As someone mentioned, playing a guitar. You don't pick up the guitar once every month and start playing, you know, a deep song or whatever. You've got to keep practicing with the thing. And as you say, once a week, or if you can make it twice, it's even better. Got to keep at it and looking for different opportunities.
One of the things that I've done for going on 3 years now is go back to the same parts of San Francisco over and over and over again. Our financial district, our South of Market district, Chinatown. I'll walk the same streets at different times of day, different times of year, with different lighting conditions, and of course, different people. I mean, that's the beauty of, you know, if you're a landscape photographer, you're going to carry a lot of gear in bad weather and hike for miles to get a shot that you've already seen somebody else take. In street photography, you're never going to get the shot that somebody else take or that you have taken yourself. It's always going
to be different. Exactly right. That is the beauty of street photography. And what a great way to end. Doug, thank you so much for joining me. It's been fascinating talking to you and learning about how you built up and got into your photography, and wish you all the best for your forthcoming trips in January and then later in March. Finally, to say happy Thanksgiving to you guys and everyone over in the States. Don't eat too much today.
No, but as I told you last week, this is one of the 2 days a year we celebrate how glad we are we're not British.
Thank you very much indeed for that. A lovely final comment. Comment. All I can say is just got to look out for Mr. Farage doesn't sort of start spending more time over there. We're quite happy for him to stay in the States, but you guys got to look out. He'll be running for president next.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, well, I don't know. I'd rather not have Farage or Trump. Give them a choice, but
yeah, exactly.
It's going to be a different world a year from now.
It's going to be exciting next 4 years, I can tell you. That's Doug, right. Thank you so much for joining me. And for everyone that's been watching, we've had some great live viewers here. So thanks for joining us on the show. Suffice to say, yeah, it's the same old sign off, even if it's a Wednesday. If you're going out shooting this weekend, take your camera, leave your camera bag at home. All the best to you. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.